from Indonesia, of course, Malaysia, Brunei Darussalam, Timor-Leste, Japan, and the United Kingdom. Indonesia, of course, Malaysia, Brunei Darussalam, Timor-Leste, your
Japan,
diverse insights
the
are
United
vital to ensuring
Indonesia,
that
of
our
course,
island society
Malaysia,
are not left behind, but instead empowered as resilient, inclusive, and innovative contributor to global sustainability. With that, I officially open the International Conference on Insular Southeast Asian Studies 2025. May our discussion over the day inspire meaningful action and foster enduring academic and policy collaboration. That's all my welcoming remarks. Thank you, best of luck, and enjoy your conference. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Phil Rido Alhamdi, MA. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ari Kusumapaksi, the Chair of International Conference on Insular Southeast Asian Studies 2025, to deliver the remarks. Dr. Ari, time is yours.
Distinguished guests, keynote speakers, fellow scholars, practitioners, students, and friends, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you all. It is a great honor for me, on behalf of the organizing committee, to welcome you to the International Conference on Insular Southeast Asian Studies 2025. This event is the result of many months of preparations, and I am very thankful to all our partners, especially Universitas Udayana, for working together with us. Together, we have created a space that connects many voices and ideas from across Southeast Asia and beyond. The theme of this year's conference shows our shared concern for the big challenges in our region, such as climate change, maritime security, poverty, disaster risks, and cultural marginalizations. It also shows our hope to turn these challenges into opportunities through open discussion, research-based solutions, and cooperation, of course, among all of us. One of our main goals is holding this conference is to take the first steps toward creating the Association of Insular Southeast Asian Studies, or Icisas. We hope Icisas will become a long-term platform where scholars, practitioners, and policymakers can continue to work together, share knowledge, and build strong partnership long after this conference ends. We are honored to welcome our keynote speakers, Dr. Fredolind, Dr. Alistair, and also Dr. June, whose work inspires global efforts for sustainability and justice. And also, I want to thank every presenter, participant, and partner institution for adding to this richness and importance of this event. As we start, I hope we can use this conference not only to share knowledge, but also to build connections, strengthen cooperation, and imagine a better future for human security in insular Southeast Asia. Once again, thank you for being here. I wish you a meaningful and inspiring conference.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for your inspiring words and for leading this important initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to our keynote session, which is one of the highlights of our event. We are honored to be joined by esteemed experts and thought leaders from around Southeast Asian region, who will each deliver keynote speeches to share their insights, research, and perspective on sustainability and collaboration in insular Southeast Asia. To lead us through today's important session, we are delighted to introduce our moderator, Rafyoga Jehan Pratama Irsadanar, PhD. He is a distinguished academic and expert in security studies and Japanese politics and foreign policy. He was an embassy recommended Monbu Kagusho, or Maxi Scholar, at Graduate School of International Cooperation Studies, Kobe University in Japan, where he was awarded Master of International Studies and Doctor of Philosophy. With various prestigious publications, his research spans Japan's security policies and cooperation in Southeast Asia. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Rafyoga Jehan Pratama Irsadanar, PhD.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning from Yogyakarta. To the Honorable, the Dean of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta, Dr. Ridho Alhamdi, and to the Honorable, the Chair of the International Conference on Insular Southeast Asian Studies, Dr. Ari Paksi, and also to the Honorable keynote speakers, Professor Freddy Tanggang, Dr. Alistair Cook, and Dr. June Rubis, and also the distinguished guests. Welcome to the keynote session of the presentation of International Conference on Insular Southeast Asian Studies 2025. Human Security in Insular Southeast Asia Towards Inclusive and Sustainable Future. So, human security and environmental sustainability has been a mounting issue worldwide, and particularly in our maritime and insular region in Southeast Asia. So, as our dean have stated, that the human security should be the foundation of regional cooperation to achieve regional resiliency. And more practically, the chair of the conference have also emphasized that the challenges of climate change and maritime security should be turned into cooperation opportunities in the future. So to deepen our understanding on our maritime region, especially in the context of human security and environmental sustainability, we are privileged to have three renowned experts and scholars sharing their expertise and experience with us. Please allow me to introduce the keynote speakers to all of you. The first one is Dr. Alistair Cook from S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Specifically, Dr. Alistair is Senior Fellow and Coordinator in the Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief Program at the RSIS. His research interests are humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, foreign policy, and regional cooperation, primarily in Asia-Pacific region. We also have Dr. June Rubis, who is the co-founder of BIIH, or Building Indigenous Initiative in Heritage Future, and research fellow in the Macquarie University in Australia. So Dr. June have worked on indigenous land rights and environmental issue in collaboration with indigenous activists and NGOs in Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysia and Borneo area. So she also has or carried on research on Bidayuh ritual revitalization, linking the revitalization and environmental change in her home state of Sarawak. And finally, we will have Professor Freddy Tanggang, who is a professor in Geography, Environment, and Development Program at the University of Brunei Darussalam. So Professor Freddy have led numerous regional and international research paper and a research project on climate variability, climate change, and oceanography, which he has published over 140 scientific papers. So each speaker will have 20 minutes to share their expertise and experience with us. So before we proceed to the main agenda, please allow me to share with you the sequence of our today's event. The first, we're going to have the keynote presentations. First, we will have the presentation from Dr. Alistair, and it will be continued by the presentation of Dr. June. And on the final keynote presentation, we will have the presentation from Professor Freddy. So each of the keynote presentation will be 20 minutes. And after that, after the three presentation, we will have the open forum and Q&A, which will be moderated by me. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with the first keynote presentation. Dr. Alistair will present on the navigating human security and governance in insular Southeast Asia. So it will strengthen our understanding of the key concept of human security and global governance by contextualizing that with the maritime Southeast Asia. So to Dr. Alistair, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Please may I share my slides? Please may I share my slides? Thank you to Dean Rido Al-Hamdi for your welcome to this event, and to Dr. Ari Paksi, Chair of the Organizing Committee, and his fellow committee members for inviting me to share with you today on the keynote panel. I have a series of slides that I hope we're able to share, but in order to continue moving, I'll begin my presentation. What I would like to do in my short intervention is to really argue that human security has redefined international security as being people-centered, and this much is known and has been known for the last 30 years since it was launched in the 1994 Human Development Report. But the much scholarship and policy focus remains on actors and institutions that govern the people rather than the lived experiences people have with global governance. This conference offers an opportunity to foreground a region with maritime commonalities that can inform how we understand global governance from the perspective of the people governed, rather than those actors and institutions that implement, deliver, supply, and support local communities. While a greater focus on everyday, what I would like to call everyday global governance, is to redress this imbalance, it is important to recognize that it's not a simple upturn in how we understand global governance, but really recognizing the multi or bi-directionality of processes and networks of actors within our very messy global governance. Next slide, please. So what I will do in this talk is I will cover this through a few main points of human security, reviewing this global governance, then really trying to make the argument for the need for everyday global governance and what that means in insular Southeast Asia, as well as thinking about what this means for the future of the region. Next slide, please.
Wait for a bit.
In terms of human security, Okay, I will just continue without the slides if you just keep it on the one slide, please. The main contribution of human security, as I just mentioned, was really in 1994 to shift the focus of international security from that of the state to that of the individual and community levels. And the 1994 Human Development Report, which came out and is produced by the United Nations Development Programme, was the report that this term human security was most notably coined, and argued that security concept must change in two basic ways. And this was from an exclusive stress on territorial security to a much greater stress on people's security. If traditional security, if we understand it as being determined by the threat or the use of force by one country to annex or invade another, or otherwise conquer land of another country, it places the unit of analysis at the level of the state within the international system. Now, human security is an argument that relocates security around the individual and community levels. The second basic way the idea of security needs to change is from a security understood by armaments to security through to sustainable human development. And since its appearance 30 years ago in the 94 Development Report, it has identified the multifaceted and cross-cutting issues around 7 original pillars: economic security, environmental security, personal security, communal security, health security, food security, and political security. Now, I just want to review what they understood those to be back in 1994 for us to consider, as well as the conference proceeds today, whether these are fit for purpose themselves. And the first is economic security, and this is essentially requiring an assured basic income for people, usually from productive work, and if not, that a social safety net exists for them to fall back on. In terms of food security, it's understanding that people have both physical and economic access to basic food. In terms of health security, this means that people have access to basic healthcare, as well as preventive measures against disease and other life-threatening ailments. In terms of environmental security, this is looking at the protection of people's well-being from environmental threats and degradation, and ensuring access to resources and a healthy living environment. In terms of personal security, this is understood to mean the security from physical violence from states, such as physical torture from other states through war, violent crime, and beyond. So essentially the threat of physical security, the threat of physical violence. Community security then focuses on the safety and well-being of individuals with a specific community, emphasizing freedom from fear and violence, as well as recognizing these communities as a source of support for individuals and what they can offer in terms of that. And the final one is political security, which really focuses on the ability of an individual to live in a society that respects the fundamental human rights as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, signed in 1948. Now, interestingly, as noted in the General Assembly Resolution 66290, human security is an approach to assist member states in identifying and addressing widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of their people. It essentially calls for people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and prevention-oriented responses that strengthen the protection and, importantly, my emphasis here, empowerment of all people. So it is important not to conflate human security with human development. And this is an important distinction. Here, human development is essentially a broader concept, and this has been defined before 1994 as a process widening the range of people's choices, whereas human security means that people can exercise these choices freely and safely. and that they can be relatively confident that the opportunities they have today are not totally lost tomorrow. So, how we understand the importance of human security and how it has shaped the international security environment is really pertinent to the number of topics that we see on the program today. But I think it's important for us to consider how individuals perceive security because it depends on their own immediate circumstances. And maybe it's important to ask yourselves, the participants in the conference, how do you perceive your own security? Often human security tends to be policy driven and issues focused. But has it delivered greater grounded realities to inform broader questions of global governance, to which I want to now turn. Next slide, please. In terms of global governance, this diagram I've just shown here, which I'll briefly talk to now, and then it will be reflected in my comments, is essentially a series of processes and actors that we see across different levels of governance. And we understand governance here in a number of ways, which I'll reflect on now. And essentially, I think the term global governance often invokes ideas about the corridors of power in New York or Geneva, the seat of the UN, the meeting place of country leaders, and perhaps the home of worldwide impacting bureaucracies and agencies. But I think it's important to take a step back from that, even though that's where most attention is given, that global governance is actually a more basic and succinct summary, being a process that dissolves the structure of agency as we saw established back in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. What I mean by that is in the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia, we saw the concept of sovereign states and the non-intervention in the domestic affairs of another state being established. And this notion of global governance has really seen in various ways, the dissolving of this as new actors and new states emerged since that period to challenge the actions of sovereigns, essentially of unelected leaders at the time in what they were doing within their own state. And what we've seen, particularly since the end of the Second World War, is the emergence of state and non-state actors that have agreed international laws and norms that have been universally applicable. Now, these different actors have sought to gain legitimacy through a variety of processes, and it can range from what we would call performance legitimacy, i.e. being good at their job, democratic legitimacy, people voted for me, proximity, those who are best placed, as in terms of closeness to those that they are governing, capacity, those that are best resourced to govern, or indeed in some cases most competitive, as in the market chose me. And these tend to be the most salient reasons why we see a broad range now of state and non-state actors claiming legitimacy to be acting on particular issues in particular places. Now, often scholarship can focus on the technical processes and procedures of how certain rules and norms were established, how different state and non-state actors seek to govern. And indeed, what you can see here in the diagram is a series of levels that we understand the international system, from the global level to the regional, the national, and the subnational or local levels. And through these levels, we see a number of interactions, and they're not contained to be just at one level. So we don't just see the international level convening only in New York and Geneva, but we see global actors acting locally within our region in Southeast Asia. And that can be through different representations of that, which I'll move on to later. But for example, being the role of the World Bank and its programs in various communities around the region. Now, what we, I think, see through this is that the studies tend to be focused on the role of UN specialized agencies, the various drives for impact or efficiency, the debates over the UN Security Council resolutions and so forth. And this has become even more acute problem as the international system today faces a reality of doing less with less, as Western donors move from funding international bodies towards funding their own militaries, and most notably the United States has had the greatest impact. This has generated interest in whether other countries will step in to support some components of this global governance system, from China to India to Gulf states to countries within the region focused on particular projects. Now, amidst this disruption and the interest to seek out new financial support, I think it is important for us to consider that some elements of the international system itself are not fit for purpose. Now, in amongst these changes, there are underexplored avenues and attention paid to aspects that are particularly important in our region of insular Southeast Asia. The first is the underexplored role of financing sourced from within our region. We've seen several initiatives within our region, but if we peel them back, reveal the reliance on ASEAN dialogue partners. And by this, I mean the United States, Australia, China, Japan, and so on. The second one I think is worth us exploring further is also the advocacy and the term localization, a term I think that is best reflected on meaning what those invoking it want it to mean. So as in localization, it depends on who's saying it, means what they want it to mean. Now, within global governance, there is a significant gap between those states articulating localization, but are effectively using it to restate some of those more traditional sovereignty norms I mentioned earlier, such as non-interference, as they have gone further, as they have not gone further in devolving power from the national level to the subnational levels, either at the provincial or local government levels, or even empowering particular communities through different modes of governance. Now, these observations essentially have come from a top-down starting point, but importantly recognizes that the processes, systems, and networks of global governance are across and between these different levels that we can see here in the diagram. But it essentially shouldn't be understood as being only top-down or bottom-up, but as a much messier model of governance with weaker lines of authority and accountability. And this is where we have difficulty, I think, with global governance. But even amidst this mess, there is less focus, I would argue, both in scholarship and in policies, on the everyday experiences of global governance that this conference seeks to address. Next slide, please. In terms of everyday governance, I think we should ask ourselves and our fellow panelists how we understand global governance. Now, along with other groups, particularly relevant in our region, religious groups, indigenous groups, refugees, women, they're all part of the globally governed populations whose past, present, and future behavior are directly influenced by the actions and activities of actors and institutions we commonly consider as part of global governance. The opening, I think, here is that the globally governed groups are rarely front and center as the focal point of study, despite the expansion of issues and groups covered by studies of global governance. Now, as Tom Weiss and Rawdon Wilkinson write in Global Governance back in 2018, the focus has been to focus on those who governs and how they do it, rather than who is governed and how that is experienced. So what is the impact of exploring world order from the bottom up rather than the top down? Many communities in our region may have an underexplored relationship with global governance than do those citizens in cities where the global governors reside, New York or Geneva, for example. Now, this exposure may well come from activities of organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, UN specialized agencies like OCHA, UNHCR, WHO, UNICEF, World Food Programme, or INGOs, even like Doctors Without Borders, Save the Children, Plan International, Oxfam, and so on, but those being the most recognizable in our region. So this exposure may also come through those even less explored life experiences with bad actors, such as criminal networks, corrupt officials, or abusive bosses. So what are these experiences like? And I think this conference really provides a platform for us to be exploring these relationships with global governance from that everyday global governance perspective. Next slide, please. In terms of
Dr.
our
Alistair,
yeah,
sorry for the interruptions. We have 5 more minutes, just for the reminder.
Yep, it will be done in less time. Next slide, please. In terms of our particular region of insular Southeast Asia, I think it's important here to note that the conference is foregrounding a particular part of a wider region that focuses primarily on the maritime communities within the region that have particular challenges, and that will inform our experience of global governance, both in terms of what actors are present, what they are providing, but also in terms of those lived experiences depending on their particular exposures to sea level rise, typhoons, coastal erosion, for example. So what is it that's unique about these experiences that we can provide through these investigations and studies within the region? And indeed, it's important to consider whether these experiences are different enough from fellow maritime communities within the broader Southeast Asia to maritime communities in Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, or even further afield, Taiwan, Sri Lanka, and coastal communities around the Bay of Bengal. What are the particular commonalities and differences? I think we need to look at this as a much more fluid region and how there are commonalities that cross over some of these constructed borders. And finally, the last slide. So this is just a call for us to be thinking about our future is now, and that we need to be encouraging one another to be thinking about these issues through our engagement with others in the panels and within the discussion sessions, to be learning what tools they're using to understand these everyday experiences of global governance, to better inform the policy agendas and priorities that we see within the international system in order to ensure that it is a much more resilient, representative, and sustainable future. And with that, I'd like to end my presentation. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Alistair, for the insightful presentation. From that, we can learn on how the state-centered concept of security have shifted into the human-centered concept of security. And to achieve that, we need a very inclusive governance system, which was called everyday global governance, in the multi-levels from the local, provincial, national, regional, and into the international governance. And to proceed, we will have the presentation from Dr. June Rubis. So her presentation will be about reimagining conservation through indigenous remembering, revitalization, and the recognitions of indigenous and traditional territories. And without further ado, Dr. June, you will have 20 minutes. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Can I start? Well, I just wanted to say congratulations to the organizers for this amazing conference. Thank you so much for inviting me, particularly Dr. Ari and Dr. Karin, for fostering us through this process. I'm very excited to be with you all here today. And also, Alistair, that was an amazing talk, and it just gave me a lot of reflections, particularly in my current role. When he talked about global governance, I currently sit on a multilateral process on the Kali Fund, and there's so much that we can discuss. But I'm going to go right into it. Can I have the first slide? Can I have the first slide up, please? Well, Dr. Alistair, he nicely set up, what is human security and how it relates to global governance. And I'm going to go straight into territorial governance, which is foundational to human security. So as Dr. Alistair had said, the human security as defined in UN frameworks is about protecting people, right? And from for example, threats or sudden disruptions. And what I want to talk about is indigenous and traditional territories and the governance of such, which secures a foundation on which many dimensions of human security rest. So, for example, food systems, water sources, cultural identity, political autonomy, and environmental stability. So when indigenous governance is undermined, either, for example, dispossession or inappropriate conservation designations, multiple aspects of human security collapse at once. So could I have the next slide, please? So this talk is actually, it's based on a policy brief that I wrote for the IUCN, and it would be published. The next slide. You're going too fast. Back to the photos. And it'll be published in I think in next month. So when we speak of conservation in Borneo, the narrative often begins with biodiversity and ends with protection. But for many indigenous peoples of Borneo, conservation begins with remembering. So here I walk through the forest of Sarawak, not as a conservation biologist alone, but as someone returning to Kent. These landscapes are inscribed with histories and entanglements of territories where knowledge, memory, and conflict have long converged. Yet in global conservation narratives, these stories are rarely heard. Indigenous lands are increasingly siloed as habitats or carbon sinks, reducing them to objectified units of value in global environmental frameworks, their peoples portrayed either as stewards or threats. Our names for places and beings are replaced. Our rituals, once central to ecological governance, are sidelined. Next slide, please. So in this talk, I draw from my research with Iban communities of Batan Ai, of Sarawak, and my own Bidayukin from the Jogoy territories to reflect on three interwoven processes: indigenous remembering, ritual revitalization, and concealment as survivance. These are not acts of longing for the past. Rather, they're forward-facing strategies of survival, political expression, and ecological care, anchored in ancestral continuity and emergent futures. This work gestures towards another kind of conservation, one that emerges not from institutional templates, but from acts of continuity, care, and refusal. It grows through memory, reactivated ceremony, and the quiet clarity of what communities choose to withhold or revive on their own terms. Next slide, please. This work also speaks to the current debates on indigenous and traditional territories within global biodiversity governance. ITTs are broadly understood as living governance systems that embody relationships between peoples, lands, waters, and more than human kin. Recognizing them is not a matter of fitting them into existing categories such as protected areas or other effective area-based conservation measures such as OECMs. It is about affirming their legitimacy on their own terms, grounded in indigenous self-determination, and ensuring their recognition in global frameworks reflects the governance systems, laws, and the values that sustain them. Next slide, please. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework explicitly acknowledges the vital role of indigenous peoples and local communities in conserving biodiversity through the governance systems, knowledge, innovations, and worldviews. Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework calls for effective conservation through, among other elements, recognizing indigenous and traditional territories where applicable. So the policy challenge is clear. While some ITTs may be recognized as protected areas or OECMs, governed solely by IPLCs in shared arrangements or within mosaics of governance, there are many contexts in which such designations will be inappropriate, inadequate, or even harmful. So in these cases, formal recognition must not undermine or replace the authority of customary systems that already meet or exceed biodiversity outcomes. Recognition processes must be led by the rightful custodians with free, prior, informed consent and in full alignment with international human rights instruments, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention, ILO 0169, and the Nagoya Protocol. Next slide, please. So in part of my work, The Power of Naming, Relational Knowledges in Conservation, much of conservation science assumes its naming systems are neutral, yet taxonomy itself is a legacy of empire. In my work on orangutan conservation, I encounter how the internationally used term orangutan, while derived from the Malay, the person of the forest, is not what or how indigenous communities like the Iban call and relate to these beings. For the Iban, the great ape is known as the Mayas, embedded in a broader place-specific classification system that reflects relational ethics, spiritual guidance, and ecological intimacy. Next slide, please. While conservation frameworks default to externally imposed nomenclature, they participate in what Linda Tuhai Smith calls the colonizing power of naming. This is not merely semantic. Naming systems create conservation realities. Who gets to name, care, and decide? Indigenous ways of knowing, often expressed through naming, reflect deep entanglements with place and more than human kin. Rather than centering a single indigenous term, such as Amayas, for example, conservation practice must create space for diverse and relational knowledges to coexist, unflattened by universalizing frameworks. Next slide, please. So ritual revitalization as governance. In another stream of my research and also personal lineage, I reflect on the revival of the Gawai Nyombang, the skull blessing ritual among Bidai communities, a process in which my late father played a vital role as a ritual priest following in the footsteps of his parents. This ritual was revitalized in response to environmental and social stress, including deforestation, illness, and the weakening of customary institutions. And this brought together cross-border sister communities in Sarawak and West Kalimantan, rekindled ancestral responsibilities, and provided a stage for recalibrating values and leadership. Next slide, please. So this revitalization must be also understood as a form of indigenous survivance, or what Visionor describes as more than a survival or endurance, a present that actively repudiates erasure, tragedy, and domination. So this revival of the ritual was not just a cultural act, but a world-making assertion, one that safeguarded more than human relationships and ancestral responsibilities from the encroachment of conservation and state power. Revitalization is not simply about resilience. It's a reclamation of ontological authority, that is to define relations between lands, spirits, ancestors, and people. It is governance, not in the bureaucratic sense, but in the sense of spiritual and ecological equilibrium. Next slide, please. So political ecology of remembering and concealing, in both cases, naming the Mayas and reviving the skull blessing ritual, we see the act of remembering as a political ecology. Remembering is not a passive nostalgia. It is a conscious refusal to allow erasure. It resists a conservation logic that views people as variables and forests as metrics. It reclaims spirit, story, and specificity. This political ecology of remembering is deeply embodied. It is in the ways we move through familiar terrain, attuned to its signs, traces, and remembered obligations. But just as crucial is the right to conceal, to protect elements of our cosmologies and practices from being misinterpreted, instrumentalized, or co-opted. So drawing from my work on concealing protocols, I argue that indigenous concealment is not avoidance or erasure. It is a form of sovereignty. Concealment can also be a survival strategy in context of dispossession, but it's also a practice of survivance, to withhold, to obscure, to protect that which must not be made illegible to systems of domination. These protocols of refusal are essential to safeguarding not only lands, but also worldviews. Next slide, please. So to reimagine conservation, we must begin not with strategy, but with story. We must ask what memories are held by this place, what rituals have protected it, what names continue to hold meaning for the people who live with this land, what the communities choose not to reveal, and why. This reimagining asks us to step outside frameworks of measurement and management. It calls for a return of humility by recognizing that mainstream conservation is but one way of knowing among many. It invites us to honor the polarity of worlds where spiritual, ritual, and ancestral relations with land are not symbolic, but vital. It means recognizing governance, not just in policy or plans, but in the dispersed leadership of communities and ceremonies. It means asking not just whether forests are intact, but whether people are sovereign, whether the knowledges are honored, and whether silence is protected as much as speech. Reimagining conservation is not about adding indigenous elements to existing systems. It is fundamentally shifting the terms of engagement. In the world I come from, rituals are not performances, they are technologies of balance. Remembering is not folklore, it is a governance practice. Concealment is not resistance alone, it is an act of care and future making. If conservation is to be just, it must answer to the land itself and to the peoples whose ancestors still walk it. It must leave room for what is messy and embodied, for what is sacred. Rituals, names, stories, and silences are not archaic practices of the past, but rather living, breathing, and very current. Next slide, please. And so this vision aligns with the ongoing discussions under the Convention on Biological Diversity on Indigenous Traditional Territories, which call for their recognition as legitimate governance and conservation systems, distinct from protected areas or OECMs, categories are not automatically absorbed into them. So in line with the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework, many Indigenous peoples, local communities, and their allies have called for the recognition of ITTs in ways that are legally binding, where appropriate, and always grounded in Indigenous self-determination. So in some contexts, legal recognition can strengthen sovereignty and tenure, but in others, we have to remember it risks undermining customary governance if imposed without consent or in frameworks that do not align with Indigenous law. Next slide, please. So recognition processes should clearly distinguish between identification. So for example, the Indigenous peoples and local communities-led process of defining what and where a territory is, recognition, the formal acknowledgement of that territory and its governance system, and classification, the placement of that territory into any national or international conservation category. Identification must always be led by the rightful custodians. We should also reject the automatic categorization of ITTs as conservation and restoration areas and ensure that any integration into national biodiversity, land, and related legislation is consistent with customary governance systems, including marine, coastal, and mobility-based systems. Next slide, please. Which is our very last. So when ITTs are recognized on these terms, conservation shifts from imposing uniform categories to affirming plural systems of governance. It moves from measuring intactness to ensuring sovereignty, securing tenure, honoring knowledge systems, and protecting silence as much as speech. To be credible and just, conservation policy must move beyond measuring coverage to safeguarding sovereignty, tenure security, and the continuity of biocultural governance. Recognizing ITTs on these terms strengthens biodiversity outcomes while protecting the cultural and political integrity of the peoples who have cared for these territories across generations. So returning to where our stories live is not symbolic. It is the basis of effective conservation. Policy and law must fully respect Indigenous and traditional territories as governance systems in their own right, defined, recognized, and where it serves their interests, classified in other systems under the authority of their rightful custodians. And this is essential to sustaining biodiversity and the relationships that unfold it. And the very last slide, please. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. June, for the very insightful and valuable presentation. From that, we can enrich our understanding on the human security and environmental aspect by studying the conservations of indigenous territories to protect indigenous communities. We can learn on how the rituals and cultures of indigenous communities can be the foundation of the effective governance and policy. So we come to the final keynote presentation by Prof. Freddy. Prof. Freddy will share his expertise on climate change and its implications for human security, in which it will be able to strengthen our foundation in human security by applying the concept into climate change, especially in Southeast Asia. To Professor Freddy, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Raf Yoga, Dean, Dr. Ari, and Dr. Karin. keynote speakers, distinguished participant. Thank you for having me in this interesting conference. I must say that this is something rather very different from where I came. I'm a climatologist, so you can see my presentation quite a shift compared to perhaps the other two speakers earlier. But I was asked actually to talk about climate change in human security. I must admit that I don't know anything about human security. I'll be bluffing if I said I know. I have never written anything. But climate change is something very important issue for us to be aware of. The first speaker mentioned about climate change a couple of times, is one of the drivers of human security, and particularly in Southeast Asia, where perhaps the exposure and vulnerability is much higher than the rest of the region. So just to guide me, these are my three outlines that I'm going to highlight in this presentation. IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN climate change panel, have addressed human security in the fifth assessment report, specifically in chapter 12. This is the definition actually. Human security in the context of climate change is a condition that exists when the vital core of human life is protected. And when the people have the freedom and the capacity to live it with dignity. So, the vital core of human life. So there are many aspects of this: the environment, the food, the health, and so on. And these are actually being threatened by climate change. So I think for your community, you need to understand a little bit about what's going on basically. So I'm a climatologist, and also used to be involved in this United Nations climate change panel. So perhaps I take this opportunity to learn a little bit about what's going on at the global scale as well as in our region here. So when you're talking about a vital core of human life, this is it. Things about the water issue, the food security, the health and well-being of human, city, urban settlement, ecosystem, all these basically support human lives, and these are being impacted and threatened by climate change, and the level of impact will be certainly greater when climate change increases beyond 1.5 degrees C, and eventually when this vital core of human lives degrade, and this will definitely degrade human security as well. So it's good to know a little bit about the physical aspect of climate change, for this community to know. And this is actually the key conclusion from the IPCC recent report. It says that recent changes in the climate are widespread. It's not just one particular place, rapid, intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years, basically. So this is a very powerful statement, but where it is coming from? First of all, let's see the temperature increase here globally. Last year, it is the warmest years, and the increase was 1.55 degrees C above pre-industrial, and this has already been, for the first time, exceeded the Paris Agreement limit, which is 1.5, basically. So if we look at the last few decades, even for the last many thousand years, this is unprecedented. What is going on here now, basically unprecedented, at least in the last 2,000 years. So if we look at the extremes of temperature, extreme of precipitation, rainfall around the world, the trend of this thing basically significant, and the scientists were able to attribute the trend not just in one particular place but around the world to the human activities basically. But here we are not just talking about the temperature, we're not just talking about rainfall. Basically, all components of the Earth system, of the Earth climate system, have been drastically changing. You're talking about glaciers, you're talking about the ocean, you're talking about the ecosystem. Everything is systematically changing, that have never been observed, in many decades or even thousands of years, So, for example, the CO2 concentration highest in 2 million, sea level rise fastest in 3,000 years, and so on, So, why this is so? This is because of course, everybody knows greenhouse gases play a role. If we look at if we look at this plot here, the current concentration of greenhouse gases currently basically around 425 parts per million, and this is much higher or very much outside the natural range of fluctuation for the last 1 million years. So this actually what drive climate change, and scientists were able to basically prove that without the greenhouse gases influence on the climate system, many models basically cannot simulate the increase of temperature since 1960s. However, if the model are fed with these greenhouse gases, and there we go, the model would be able to simulate this increase of temperature, since 1960s, and what has been observed, especially in this period, can very much attributed to the human influence, not other influence, basically. So IPCC were able to make a conclusion that it is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change, making extreme climate events, including heat wave, heavy rainfall, and drought more frequent and severe. And we understand now that it is human that being facing this experience, but of climate change, but it is also human that causing this, basically. So it is affecting the entire globe, entire world, and the changes is likely to be increasing more, if the world fails to, cater this greenhouse gases reduction. But what's scary is that, without full mitigation of the climate system, by moving into low carbon economy, by 2100, the temperature will be 4-5 degrees much higher than what in the last in the pre-industrial period. In this part equivalent to like 3,000 million years ago. What happened 3 million years ago. If that continues to another 200 or 300 years, and then the temperature will be 15 degrees higher, and of course human would not survive. What is needed basically, for sustainability, for us to moving into this low carbon economy, where we reduce our greenhouse gases, and if that can be done, and then we can basically save this earth by 2100, 2300. The temperature won't be that high, and something that livable, So the thing is that this can be illustrated with this, as you can see that since pre-industrial with this emission, the Earth has just been getting warmer and warmer into the so-called Anthropocene era, and this is really on the trajectory for us to go into the so-called hot house here, where the temperature more than 4 degrees, 5 degrees in the future. So what needed to be done basically is to steer back the Earth back into something that livable for human and So if I can highlight this is a latest projection, climate projection, produced by the Singapore Climate Research Center. Without sufficient mitigation, we will be, heading into the so-called hothouse Earth, where in the future, this is a worst case scenario here in terms of frequency. In the future, in the maritime continent, in the Southeast Asia region, perhaps in the future, by 2100, every day will be heat waves. Every day will be heat waves, and the temperature will be 4 or 5 degrees much higher. So that is the scenario that we have, and we need to move into this kind of stabilized world where the condition perhaps is not as bad as compared what we have today, and with adaptation perhaps we can survive. So those are the temperature increase. But if we look at the dryness, so the temperature increase comes with the dryness. So in the future, in the hot house, the whole region in this Malaysian, Indonesian archipelagos here will be experiencing more than 50% dryness in terms of these so-called consecutive dry days. So for example, if today is 5 days no rain, in the future perhaps 10 days no rain, and that has implication on the core of these human lives that I was talking about. And the thing is that things will be, the risk of impact on this vital core of human lives are even much greater if some of these achieve, some of these so-called climate tipping points, where if this is reached, it triggered the rate of changes in the climate system even more faster. So we need to talk about how to steer back the Earth so that we can have human security. So we need to reduce greenhouse gases, but we need to understand where it is coming from. And the IPCC says that 75 of this coming from land use and also fossil fuels. And in order to do that, we need to drastically reduce, where the IPCC said that to achieve 1.5 degree, to achieve this stabilized world, by 2030, we need to reduce by 50% of these greenhouse gases to about 20 to 30 gigaton, sorry about the unit here, gigaton CO2 equivalent, from the current one. And by 2050, we shall achieve so-called net CO2 net zero CO2 by 2050. And this is the science that telling us that we don't have much choice if we were to achieve this stabilized world by the end of the century. But having said that, what has been achieved is not very good. It's not really of a good news, because the pledges under the so-called NDC, and also the policy in place currently, will not take us below 1.5, but instead will create a warming trajectory for the Earth for more than 3 degrees. And this is really bad news, because we know that from this negotiation under the COP things, there are a lot of problems, and we are not even sure if the world will be able to fix the climate change. So you're talking about a risk. The risk is going to be higher and higher. For example, this unique and threatened system as well as extreme. Even if 1.5 is already shifting into the higher risk, let alone 2 degree. So if we look at, be specific on some of this ecosystem, which is the core of this human security, support lives and so on, will be greatly impacted as temperature increasing beyond 1.5. So this is my second last slide. All of us are well impacted in one way or another. If we are born here, we are already here, and we are already impacted. But this current generation, born about this time, they will be impacted more and more, especially when climate change is not fully mitigated, basically. So you're not just talking about the human security. You're not just talking about, you're talking about whether humans survive or not in this kind of environment in the future. So this is my last slide. Climate change is real, widespread, rapid, intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. This is coming from the IPCC assessment, which is robust, transparent, and open. Climate change has impacted vital course of human life, human security, and unless we are able to limit this weapon impact and adapt, the risk of impact of vital course of human life continue to increase. But unfortunately, for now, we are still scrambling. The world is still scrambling to find a solution, and with some countries reversing its policy, this is bad news. And what we have now, commit the Earth on a trajectory, a warming trajectory to more than 3 degrees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fredolin, for the fruitful and moving presentation on how climate change does not stop on the rising temperature, but they will also impact all components of the Earth system, from land, sea, and air, and on how it will impact everyone. And more importantly, if nothing is being done, it will get worse at this point, and it will also affect the human security and human survival in the future. We will now proceed to the open discussion and the Q&A forum. So we already have a few questions from the YouTube live streaming, but we will prioritize the one in the Zoom. Should you have any questions, please mention your name, your institution, and to which keynote speaker you're addressing your questions to. So is there any questions from the Zoom, from the online participants? Okay, so I saw some questions from the So if you have some questions, you can raise your hand, and then we will give you the microphone. Okay, so I think we will start from the questions from the Zoom. We have a few questions, but I will start with the questions to Dr. Alistair. So this question is from Adli Hasmi from National University of Surabaya. So his question is, in what ways might interdisciplinary research, drawing from anthropology, ecology, and political science, offer more nuanced policy responses to human security challenges in the region? So, we might start with that questions first, while waiting for the online participants to probably prepare some questions. To Dr. Alistair, you might want to address that.
Sure, thank you, Adley. I understood the question to be about what ways anthropology and broadly multidisciplinary approaches can better inform policy decision-making. For that, I sort of briefly touched on it, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to expand on it. I think the toolkits that we use in different disciplines can often vary, as well as our level of focus. So by building even transdisciplinary approaches, and by that I mean it's not just thinking of it in terms of disciplines working together, but moving beyond these boundaries, that we can perhaps have a better understanding of the societies and groups that we're looking to conduct our investigations. And so just having a more nuanced understanding of what these lived experiences are, and particularly I think we can draw more lessons from anthropology than we can political science in this, will be a better approach for the way in which we understand the impacts of global governance and all these actors that are having very localized impacts on people's lives and their communities. So in sum, I guess that yes, I think some disciplines have got more to offer. We've already heard a lot from, I think, political science. But when we look at other disciplines that focus on these local level and community level experiences, that they've got more. But the challenge will be whether the activities of those and the toolkits of those in those disciplines, like anthropology, sociology, are able to talk to the policy audience. And this is where we often see the biggest challenge, is that whilst they're able to capture these experiences, they're not necessarily translating to an understanding by those who are performing the governance, right? So this is a real challenge. So there's a lot to offer from these other disciplines, but whether or not we're able to make the transition to make them understood by those in positions of power remains to be seen, but it's something we need to all be working on together.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alistair, for the answer. I hope that Dr. Adli can watch that from YouTube. We also have another question for Dr. June. So this question is from Luna from Thammasat University. So her question is, how can global conservation targets be achieved without undermining indigenous sovereignty? And what would it look like if what would it look like if recognition processes were fully led by rightful custodians? So I think Dr. June can address that question.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, as I mentioned, currently within Target 3, we have, there's different pathways for the governments to achieve, like, for example, the 30 by 30 goal, right? So it's protected areas and OECMs, which I mentioned, the other effective conservation measures. And for both units, it's been quite controversial for communities because of the past histories of, for example, dispossession. So for example, political ecology has shown that in conservation, the conservation as we know it, mainstream conservation, it dispossesses people from their lands and their livelihoods. So that's why what's been interesting in the last year or so, the term indigenous and traditional territories has been included in Target 3. So I think one of the ways that we can support indigenous peoples and local communities is to see how, for example, the ITTs, which I've talked about, these are territories that should be governed and managed by indigenous peoples and local communities alone in their own laws, institutions, and knowledge systems. So, for example, unlike for example, protected areas or OECMs, the ITTs do not require state designation or alignment with conservation metrics. So the recognition of the ITTs in the conservation of biological diversity context, it affirms these governance systems as legitimate in their own right, which is distinct from state-led or externally classified areas. But that is my interpretation, because right now we're heading into Panama, which is where the Article 8J meeting will be held, and the guidelines of how states can recognize ITTs within this context it will be currently debated. So then there would be guidelines that would be then drafted. So I think it's important to remember, and I really appreciate Alice's talked about, he talked about the difference in governance. And I think it's also useful when we talk to governments or to policymakers, is to remind them that the state policy, in many ways, like indigenous governance is not a subset of state governance, but a parallel and legitimate system. So what does it mean in practice? It means can states recognize legal pluralism, which I think in extent that they do. If you look at your, different national contexts, are there clear jurisdictional boundaries, and are there coexistent mechanisms that respect free prior informed consent and uphold, for example, indigenous laws as primary authority within the ITTs? So again, but I think, so a lot of, it's interesting because the debate goes around where indigenous advocates, they want recognition. But I think we also have to recognize that recognition, when imposed without consent or aligned to external frameworks that dilute or override indigenous governance, it actually does more harm than non-recognition to indigenous territories. So we have to be really careful and also be really aware, and then it really context specific when we talk about like the issues that pertain to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. June, for the insights. I'm sure that it will enlighten everyone here on the indigenous territory and the conservation. And the final question is to Dr. Fridolin. So this question is from Nanda from the International Relations Department at Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. So the question is, Southeast Asia consists of many cultures, people, and issues. So what will be the best approach to promote human security and sustainability? And what might be ideas to facilitate them so they can inspire one to another? So I think the question is how to facilitate like the diversity into like unified response against climate change. So to Dr. Fridolin, you might address this question.
Thank you, Dr. Rab Yoga. I think that's a difficult question. Honestly, every time I make a presentation to a different community, I feel very nervous, because of the level of technicality of some of the stuff that we have, being a climatologist, So yeah, as I presented, the evidence is not very good for us moving forward without sufficient mitigation, reduction of greenhouse gases, So we are at 1.5 degree, and around the world you can see, all kind of never seen extremes. In Europe, we're talking about heat wave, floods. Recently in Texas, these are a developed world. They are very much capable for adaptation, and still being impacted very much. In Southeast Asia, this is almost entirely developing countries, high exposure, high vulnerability, and do not have much means to adapt to climate change. So, ensuring that 1.5 degrees is achieved is something like a must for Southeast Asia, and this is where communities perhaps need to understand, need to voice their need to ensure their voice is heard, because otherwise we will be impacted. And I'm sure there is ways to do this, but again, I'm not really sure to what extent these kind of voices will be heard by the world, because and every time COP meetings that in some countries, there are a lot of representation from all kind of communities, but at the end, COPs are every year by year basically failing in terms of ensuring that country commitment from country on the world, toward this mitigation, reducing greenhouse gases and achieving 1.5. In fact, we have seen, the latest development in the world now. Some countries, particularly one particular country, reversing all the policy in ensuring that greenhouse gases is limited. So this is really bad news. But I'm not an expert to this. Perhaps some other colleagues here can answer how should we be moving forward with this.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fridolin, for the answer and enlightenment. Okay, so I think Dr. Alistair is raising his hand on Zoom.
Thank you. I just wondered if I could answer the question in the chat on Zoom.
Okay, so the question is, so Dr. Cook, I am Alex from University of Malaya. Can you elaborate on the extent of the shift of a human-centric trend? All right, so Dr. Alistair, you might want to address that question.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Alex. I think this is a really important one. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that governments are realizing that when they don't listen to people that they're experiencing quite significant shifts. This is perhaps more obvious in the West, and it might not go in the ways in which they expect it to go. And here I'm looking at things like the UK exit from the European Union. We're looking at sort of the Make America Great Again movement in the US, and so on, where these large numbers of pockets of communities are feeling very disconnected from these globalized processes and want their governments to be doing something about it. So why this is linked to human security is because essentially we're looking at the idea of security being at local and community levels and having the empowerment of people in their countries. And what we're seeing at the moment is perhaps more of a significant sign that when human security rises, then governments are now witnessing some of that pushback. So I think we're also seeing the destabilizing impacts that human insecurity has on certain systems and processes. So I think it's important for us to be aware of that, and it really underlines the importance of that human-centered understanding of security in the world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alistair. I think Dr. June is also raising her hand. So Dr. June, you might want to share something.
Thank you. I also had a question, but it was posed to me in a private chat, but I think it's a really good question and really relevant. So the question was about what about indigenous peoples who are displaced from their territories? And that's a really great question, because when we talk about the ITT recognition, obviously we talk about ITT governance, which is rooted in place, right? So what happens? So it draws like legitimacy, law, and identity from the place itself or waters. So what happens when indigenous peoples, like communities, are displaced? And this could be, due to conflict, extractive industries, development, conservation exclusion, or climate change. So how do we look at this direct exercise of territorial governance? Because it's already been interrupted. So, I think recognition processes under the CBD must account for both of those who remain in territories and those in the diaspora who maintain relationships, because you still maintain relationships and rights and responsibilities, even though you're displaced from these territories. And if we look at that, for example, the UNDRIP and ILO 169, on the legal recognition of continuing rights. So national laws and international frameworks, they affirm that displacement does not distinguish territorial rights. So we have to think about, for example, where many indigenous governance systems include roles for those living outside their territories. And that could be, for example, ritual participation or decision-making assemblies. And how can we restore or have return pathways where communities do want, when they want to return to these territories. So it's a really interesting question, and I think it was really relevant to what we see currently in Southeast Asia. And it's part of the debate, ongoing debate, on how do we deal with communities that are being displaced. So thank you for that.
Okay, so we have another question. But before I read this question, I would like to inform the keynote speaker that before the closing session of today's keynote, we will invite the keynote speakers for a closing statement for everyone. So just like an early information, probably you want to prepare some kind of like inspiring quotes or something like that. Okay, so the question is from Dr. Karin. So the question is for Dr. June and Dr. Alistair. Given shifting foreign funding impacting parts of Southeast Asia, how can governance system in the region mitigate new foreign funding trends from creating old insecurities? So we might want to start from Dr. Alistair to share his insights. So to Dr. Alistair, you might want to share your answer to this question.
Thanks, Karen. Very difficult question, as I would expect. I think the challenge here is really we also have to look at the role of national governments here, that they have an important role in dealing with other other countries, right? The most important role here. And I suspect what is meant by this is looking at some of those questionable practices of investment, which are overriding some local, particularly environmental concerns. So what springs to mind with your question, if I'm direct and honest about it, is natural resource exploitation and minerals here within the region as part of the energy transition and what that means, particularly in insular Southeast Asia. So I think here we really need to be pushing for national governments to be improving their rules and regulations for new investments within the region to ensure that those local communities are not negatively impacted by these sorts of investments. In terms of the broader, even if we want to look at some of the dynamics of perhaps humanitarian or in the disaster space, that we might see shifts in terms of priorities. So we might be looking at no longer funding particular initiatives. And I note here, we mentioned before about climate that we just heard about, but then also ones focused on women are being defunded. So we also need to be, and this was what I was sort of highlighting in my intervention, is that we really need to be looking within our region as well for sources of financial support for some of these initiatives to ensure that they are sustainable. Ultimately, sustainability means that we can't be overly reliant on external funding partners. So however those dynamics globally change, we need to be looking at much more sustainable ways of funding these initiatives and ensuring that we have much more inclusive governance in place to withstand any global ruptures within with the impacts on the local communities.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alistair. And to Dr. June, do you have some insights to the question?
Yes, thank you, Karin. It's a great and timely question. I was recently on a climate finance policy panel in Kuala Lumpur last week. Was organized in the National Securities Commission. And one of the questions was like, how can we make like a Malaysia a regional leader in attracting, all this global climate financing? And then, because then they were sort of alluding, didn't mention, the names of the countries, as like compared to other, countries in the region. And I said, yeah, obviously we mean Indonesia, because Indonesia does have, it has the size and the biodiversity that attracts, like global climate finance. So I think when we think about, like coming from our respective countries, we can't just think like within our country ourselves, but we also have to think regionally. So there's a lot of like initiatives right now with TFFF that, it's about global scale or regional scale. So I think, for example, like countries like Malaysia, we can't compete on scale, compared to Indonesia or Brazil. But, perhaps we can lead on integrity. So I'm also part of the Kali Fund Steering Committee, and I'm trying to embed like governance, like the idea of governance, IPLC governance in the funding mechanisms, like the climate fund, which is a multilateral mechanism. And I'm trying to convince parties. I mean, it's when we think about co-governance, we think about, for example, the scaffolding of where communities are also part of the co-management of financing model. So we're not just beneficiaries, but we're also co-managements. What does it mean? So it means that when we embed the governance within these climate financing mechanisms, it's not just about inclusion, but it's actually innovation. You're future-proofing these financial mechanisms so that you don't have any more risks of like greenwashing claims and such. You ensure that the monies, the funding actually goes through communities. You're actually supporting governments and government agencies to ensure that the work is actually being done on the ground. And what does it mean? It means that we build legitimacy, we strengthen outcomes on the ground, and you can position, for example, Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines as a regional leader, to hold, like, for example, these funds, if you want like equitable, high impact climate financing. So, I mean, that is sort of like the lens that I think about and the ways that I try to position, like, for example, indigenous peoples and local communities governance to rethink, to reframe, not seeing just communities as in, oh, they come to COP and they make noise, but they were actually making huge shifts. It's just incremental and it's positive incremental shifts. So I think that's why it's important to support communities and always trying to make the linkages between the global, regional, national, and local levels, and always trying. I mean, I think that's our job as academics in this sense. How do you translate this? Not just for policymakers, but also the communities that you work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. June, for the answer and like update insights. So before we proceed to the virtual coffee break, I would like to invite the keynote speakers to share their final and closing statement to the audience. And for that, I would like to change a bit on the sequence. We will start from Dr. Fredolin and then Dr. Alistair and then Dr. June. So to Dr. Fredolin, please share your closing statement to the audience.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, you heard, my presentation, very much science, very much climatology, and some people, tend to ignore this. But the fact is that this is the science that coming from the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. It says that climate change is real, widespread, rapid, intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. It is the human that causing it. We are already at 1.5 degree, and the next level is 2 degree, and so on and so on. And as temperature increases, the level of impact will increase. Every community, every people will be impacted. Human security will degrade. And it's not the science people like me will solve it. It is the people itself, the commitment by countries, the governance and policy, the right government and policy will take us out of this very challenging problem. I wish I will be there until 2100 to prove that we are actually be able to maintain this temperature of the Earth 1.5 degree. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Fredolin, for the moving message. The next one to Dr. Alistair. Feel free to share your closing statement to the audience.
Great, thank you. Well, firstly, thanks again to the organisers for this opportunity. I think what's come out through the discussion afterwards is really one of our challenges today is the breakdown in communications between different groups of people with different ideas, philosophies, priorities. So how can we encourage one another to take the opportunities to present to us in forums like this and in our own communities to learn how other communities engage in similar issue areas? So I think for me, as a teacher in Southeast Asian studies, I think it is important to also be looking at other people's experiences. So when I mentioned before about the need for perhaps even transdisciplinary approaches, that we have to take ourselves out of our own disciplines, out of our own locales to also learn from one another and hopefully build what Dean Rido Al-Hamadi said at the beginning as a way to strengthen solidarity across the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alistair. And to Dr. June, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Well, this whole conference is about human security, right? And how do we secure the foundations of human security itself? So my talk was about, how do we understand, for example, indigenous conservation and governance, particularly in the lens of global environmental policy. So I think, for me, when we want to talk about recognizing indigenous and traditional territories, we're not just talking about drawing boundaries on a map. We're talking about, how do we secure the foundations of human security? How do we safeguard food, water, cultural, governance, and community resilience in the face of what we heard of climate change and also political change for those who remain on the land and also for those who have been displaced from it. So in many contexts, this recognition, it can mean co-governance, but I love the carefulness of what does co-governance mean particularly in the eyes of the state. But I do believe when states and indigenous custodians share responsibility, differentiated responsibility and roles for stewardship, And when we design it with free prior informed consent, this co-governance, or whatever term we can call it, it gives governments the confidence, for example, that national biodiversity targets will be met. While we can ensure for communities that, like our laws and knowledge systems are, they remain primary on our territories. So when you want to think about how can these global environmental frameworks, be more just or effective, we can also think about how the ITT recognition, it can strengthen sovereignty, tenure, and bicultural governance, while guarding against the forms of recognition that displace or diminish indigenous authority. So in this way, we can think about, for example, policies, conservation, environmental policies. I mean, not just as a tool, for protecting biodiversity, but can it also be a pathway for governments and, and communities to work together to secure the lives and identities and securities of those who have been caring for these territories for many decades and hundreds of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. June, for the closing message. So we have come to an end to the keynote session this morning. I'm happy to serve as your moderator today, and I would like to thank the keynote speakers for sharing their expertise and insights on human security. We are able to learn a multi-perspective on the idea of human security, ranging from the everyday security, everyday governance, environmental security, and also indigenous community. So I'm sure that it will stimulate a more fruitful discussion in lots of panels that we're going to have this afternoon. And I will also thank the participants for the engaging questions and active participation. So thank you once again. I give the screen back to the MC. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for leading the keynote session, Dr. Rafi. Such an inspiring and remarkable session. Ladies and gentlemen, due to the time constraint, we apologize that the virtual coffee break session will not take place as planned. However, before we proceed, we would like to sincerely thank you to our keynote speaker, Dr. Alistair Cook, Dr. Jen Rubis, and also Dr. Fredolin Tangang for the insightful and also inspiring presentation. We highlight that your contribution has means a lot and truly enrich today's discussion, and hopefully it gives impactful meaning to the development in the Southeast Asian region. And distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to our panel sessions. Please note that this will be held in parallel panel Zoom breakout rooms as indicated in your program book that we've been shared in the group chat and also in email. So we kindly ask all presenters to join your respective Zoom breakout rooms according to the panel that, you are assigned to. And as for audience, you are warmly invited to join any panel session that interests you. This is your chance to listen, to learn, and also engage with our presenters across a variety of topics under the conference theme, which is Human Security in Insular Southeast Asia Towards an Inclusive and Sustainable Future. And in this first panel session, we have 4 panels run through. For panel 1 is the post-disaster redevelopment, issues and challenges, chaired by Dr. Idam Badruzaman. And for panel 2, displacement and belonging in the region, Rohingya, refugees and diaspora politics, chaired by Dr. Ajeng Puspa Marlinda. For panel 3, it is blue governance, urbanism and development, chaired by Dr. Izni Azrin bin Nur Azali. And the last is panel 4, sustainability and security in transition, governance and policy innovation in the region, chaired by Dian Asmawati. And the committees already opened the breakout rooms for each panel. So let's now begin the parallel panel session 1.